Hey Lifers, Dustin here, and this past season the NC State Wolfpack celebrated 50 years in Carter-Finley Stadium. Now, the stadium was actually opened in 1966, originally as Carter Stadium, with a capacity of 41,000. The hyphenated Finley was added in 1979, and the current capacity is 57,000, making it the 8th largest stadium in the ACC. The Pack have had plenty of huge wins in that stadium over the last 50 years, and I figured today, as we gear up for the 2017 college football season, I would take a look at what I consider to be the top 10 NC State home games of the last 50 years in Carter-Finley Stadium. Now, remember there are players like Phillip Rivers and Russell Wilson and Mario Williams and coaches like Lou Holtz and Dick Sheridan that have been on the sidelines in this stadium. So come along as we count down the top 10 NC State home games of the last 5 decades, starting of course with number 10. Forgot to add my little NC State helmet for that first intro. Number 10, 1975, NC State 21, North Carolina 20. A week after playing number 15 Notre Dame, North Carolina went into its annual rivalry game against NC State. Heartbroken in the previous week's loss against the Irish, UNC found itself down 21-14 late with a chance to score and tie the game. They actually scored a touchdown, and an extra point would have tied it up and likely tied the game, but head coach Bill Dooley decided to roll the dice and go for 2. He didn't convert. NC State ran the clock out and upset the Tar Heels 21-20. The Tar Heels would finish the season with a final record of 3-7-1, while the Wolfpack would have a pretty successful record considering, going 7-4-1 after a very close loss to Bobby Bowden's West Virginia team in the Peach Bowl. Number 7, 2002, NC State 17, number 14 Florida State 7. When Florida State first joined the ACC in 1992, they absolutely terrified the conference for the first decade. I mean, they were destroying teams. And even though the 2002 squad didn't quite have the cachet and the talent that previous Florida State teams had, their name, Florida State Seminoles, still meant something. And that's why it was so sweet for NC State fans when the Wolfpack became the very first ACC team to beat the Noles in back-to-back seasons. A Seminole defensive touchdown early in the game put them up 7-0 early, but after that, the Wolfpack grinded, and a late interception sealed the victory for the Wolfpack. The fans rushed the field and tore down the goalposts, and NC State, after a 3-game skid, got their very first 10-win season in school history. Number 8, 2011, NC State 37, number 7 Clemson 13. The Clemson Tigers started the 2011 season 8-0 with serious national championship aspirations until an embarrassing loss against Georgia Tech. Now, they would win the ACC Atlantic the week after that, so coming in against a 5-5 NC State squad, it was pretty much a given that Clemson was going to steamroll them and go on to the ACC championship looking straight ahead the whole time. Right? It didn't quite happen that way. What was considered to be the juggernaut of Clemson's offensive machine got stuck in the mud. They only converted 2 of 14 third downs, rushed for 34 yards, and worst of all, they committed 4 turnovers. NC State used a 27-point third quarter to absolutely lay a smackdown on the eventual ACC champs, and ABC cut the national feed in the third quarter. It would be Clemson's worst loss until a 70-33 humiliation in the Orange Bowl 6 weeks later. Number 7, NC State 28, number 16 Florida State 24. The Seminoles, under first-year head coach Jimbo Fisher, were undefeated in ACC play, while the Wolfpack were coming off a loss at East Carolina the week before in overtime. NC State has long been a thorn in Florida State's side and continued to pursue that after an early score put them up in the first quarter. But 3 straight Christian Ponder touchdowns, 2 of them rushing, put the Noles up 21-7 and had many doubting if NC State could mount a comeback. They did, mounting an impressive second-half comeback. With 2 minutes and 40 seconds left, Russell Wilson found George Bryan in the end zone for a 28-24 lead. Florida State could move the ball, though, and with 53 seconds left, they found themselves at the NC State 4-yard line until a missed handoff resulted in a fumble. That, of course, was recovered by NC State. Game over. NC State would control its own destiny in the ACC Atlantic race, at least for another week, while Florida State would go on to lose to Virginia Tech in the ACC Championship. Number 6, 2012, NC State 17, number 3 Florida State 16. In their first trip back to Raleigh since the last entry on our list, Florida State came into this game with national championship aspirations. Starting ranked 7 in the preseason poll, they had risen up to number 3 by beating their first 3 opponents by a combined 176-3 before pulling away from a top 10 Clemson team at home. They seemed unstoppable. NC State, meanwhile, had lost to a Tennessee team that would finish with a losing record and had beaten South Alabama, UConn, and the Citadel, 3 teams not exactly known as world beaters. Even with all of this happening, NC State probably could not tune out the media's constant chatter about how the Wolfpack are always a thorn in the side of the Seminoles, which they are. Though it was just 16 points, Florida State jumped out 16-0 at halftime, and at the time, if you watched the game, it almost seemed insurmountable. NC State tacked on a field goal in the third quarter, but still needed a rally in the fourth in order to have a chance to win. Insert Mike Glennon. He and the offense turned a Justin Burris interception into a touchdown less than 2 minutes later. After trading punts, NC State went for what felt like a do-or-die fourth down at the Florida State 36. They needed 10, but they got 5. Down 16-10 in the fourth quarter, NC State still had all 3 of their timeouts and used all 3 as Florida State tried to bleed the clock. With 2:23 left, NC State got the ball at the Florida State 43 after a very rare shanked Florida State punt. They tried to take as much time as they could, and it worked. With 16 seconds left, Mike Glennon found Brian Underwood for a touchdown, and the extra point put Pack up 17-16. Florida State got the ball back, but, unfortunately for them, ran out of time, and the Noles fell in Carter-Finley Stadium for the second trip in a row. Number 5, 1988. NC State 10, number 9 Clemson 3. Clemson came into Raleigh in 1988 a pretty confident team. Under head coach Danny Ford, the Tigers basically owned the ACC in the decade of the 80s, winning 4 ACC championships and a national championship, though NC State had won 2 in a row in the series. Both teams came into the game with a record of 5-1, with NC State's only loss a close one against Maryland and Clemson's the infamous Punt-Rooski game against number 10 Florida State at home. A defensive battle unfolded with both Clemson and State tied 3-3 at the half. To show you the type of offense that Clemson ran at the time compared to the type of offense they run now, in the first 2 quarters of the game, the Tigers were 0 for 6 for 0 yards passing. A high snap on a punt attempt in the fourth quarter went over the punter's head, and NC State started that possession inside the Tigers' red zone. They would capitalize on it and go up 10-3. They would never allow the Tigers another score and won the game 10-3. This was the 3rd year in a row that they beat Clemson, and this would be Clemson's only conference loss on the year. NC State would finish 8-3-1 after a great Peach Bowl win against the Iowa Hawkeyes. Number 4. 2009, NC State 28, number 24 North Carolina 27. The 2009 season for the NC State Wolfpack was largely one to forget. They beat up on FCS foes Murray State and Gardner-Webb, and they squeaked by eventual 2-10 Maryland by a touchdown. The biggest highlight had likely been beating an eventual 10-win Pitt team, but that was overshadowed by losses to Duke, Boston College, and Virginia Tech. Their redemption? Well, since NC State was eliminated from bowl contention at the time, they would just have to settle for knocking off 8-3 and top 25 ranked rival North Carolina. UNC was up 24-14 at the half, but NC State had a guy on their quarterback. His name was Russell Wilson. On the first play of the second drive of the second half, Russell Wilson found Owen Spencer for 56 yards and a touchdown. UNC would add a field goal to go up 27-21, but on the second play of the fourth quarter, Wilson would once again find Spencer for a touchdown, this time from 38 yards out. With under 5 minutes left to go in the game, the Tar Heels missed a field goal and got the ball back with one last shot to try to go down, try to get a field goal and win the game with 20 seconds left, and then they immediately threw an interception. NC State would, in effect, play spoiler, possibly changing North Carolina's bowl selection as to where they would go, and they would fall to current ACC member Pittsburgh in the Car Care Bowl. UNC would later have their victories in the 2008 and 2009 seasons vacated anyway due to improper benefits. Number 3, 2011, NC State 56, Maryland 41. At first glance, this game doesn't look like it should be ranked that high. Maryland was 2-9, and their only wins that year were against FCS Towson and a bowl-less Miami team. NC State was already 6-5, but because 2 of those wins were against FCS teams, they needed to beat Maryland to be bowl eligible. Now, this didn't seem that odd or that really big of a task, considering they had absolutely smothered number 8 Clemson the week before. So when they found themselves down to the Terps 34-14 at the half, it is safe to say that the fans were stunned. The same team that a week earlier was up 27-3 at the half against the eventual conference champions were down by 20 at the half to the worst team in the conference. Things looked even worse when Maryland started the third quarter with a touchdown and put the Pack in a 41-14 hole. But then something clicked. The Pack went 69 yards and 9 plays for a touchdown, 41-21. Maryland went 3 and out. NC State went 61 yards in 4 minutes, 41-28. The first play of the next drive, Maryland fumbles, NC State recovers, and unbelievably takes just 1 minute to score, and suddenly it's 41-35. The Wolfpack had scored 2 touchdowns in the first 2 minutes of the fourth quarter. The next Maryland drive ended in an interception, and NC State did what many thought was the impossible with 7 minutes left to go in the game. They scored again another touchdown to go up 42-41. Another Maryland 3 and out, and with just over 2 minutes to go, NC State scored their fourth quarter touchdown of the day, going up 49-41. 5 plays later, Maryland quarterback C.J. Brown was picked off by NC State cornerback C.J. Wilson, who raced 59 yards for another touchdown. Game, set, match. The final score, unbelievably, was 56-41. NC State had scored the second largest comeback in conference history, including 35 fourth quarter points, in order to win and become bowl eligible. Mike Glennon finished the game with 6 total touchdowns as the two teams combined for 9 total turnovers. The outcome was especially devastating for a Maryland team that earlier in the year had been up on Clemson 35-17, only to lose that one 56-45 at home. Number 2, 1998, NC State 24, number 2 Florida State 7. Unless you really experienced Florida State in the 1990s, it is really hard to describe just how dominant they were. They entered the league in 1992 and did not lose a conference game until 1995. In the 1998 season, they were 47-1 all-time as a conference member against fellow members of the ACC, and they were coming into this game ranked number 2. NC State, however, was coming into the 98 season with a 6-5 record from 97, going 3-5 in ACC play, including a 48-35 loss against the number 3 ranked Florida State Seminoles the year before. The Wolfpack entered the game as 25-point underdogs, merely a stepping stone to the rest of Florida State's season. And the first play from scrimmage looked like it would once again be another Florida State knockout from an opponent really early in the game when Chris Winkie found Peter Warwick for a 74-yard touchdown. Really quick into the game, 7-0 Florida State. It would be Florida State's last score of the game. See, NC State had something that Florida State, it was kind of like their kryptonite, and that is wide receiver Torrey Holt. Arguably the greatest wide receiver in NC State history, he actually had 168 yards and 5 touchdowns, that's all 5 of their touchdowns, the year before in Tallahassee, and he didn't lose much steam this year. Holt returned a punt for a touchdown and had a 63-yard receiving touchdown, as NC State would end up giving Florida State their worst conference loss for years to come. Chris Winkie would go on to eventually win the Heisman Trophy and have his number retired in Tallahassee, but by far this was his worst game ever. Dude went 8 for 29 and had 6 interceptions. he was benched halfway through the fourth quarter. Florida State would rebound. They would not lose another game until that year's BCS National Championship game. NC State, for their part, laid a very nice foundation for things to come, and a little-known quarterback named Phillip Rivers would join the team 2 years later. And number 1, 1986. Number 16, NC State 23, South Carolina 22. I did not grow up an NC State fan. I had to kind of research this video, and while I was doing so, one game came up time and time again. It didn't seem to have anything to do about bragging rights or conference positioning. It just seems like it's one of those games and one of those plays where every NC State fan knows where they were when it happened. November 1st, 1986. NC State had just come off back-to-back wins against rivals North Carolina and Clemson. South Carolina came into the game 2-4-1, but had just beaten East Carolina 38-3. NC State led the game 17-6 at halftime, but a touchdown and a field goal in the third quarter for the Gamecocks had them down just one going into the fourth. After converting an interception into a quarterback sack for a touchdown, the Gamecocks go for two, don't get it, and are up 22-17. Eventually, a little bit later on in the game, South Carolina shanks a punt and it goes out of bounds at their own 40, and NC State gets the ball with a chance to win with 33 seconds left. As time expires, NC State is sacked. That's the end of the game, except for the fact that defensive lineman for South Carolina is clearly offsides, giving the Wolfpack one last untimed down. Quarterback Eric Kramer scrambled a little bit on this last play, threw the ball into the end zone where it landed through triple coverage right into the open hands of one Dan Peoples for the game-winning touchdown. Carter-Finley went absolutely bonkers, and NC State beat South Carolina 23-22. NC State would finish the season 8-3-1 after falling to Virginia Tech in the Peach Bowl, while South Carolina would finish the season with a very odd-looking 3-6-2 record. So there you have it, guys. That is my list, my picks for the top 10 games of NC State at Carter-Finley over the last 50 years. I did not grow up an NC State fan, so all of you Wolfpack fans, let me know how good this list was. Is there anything else you would have rather seen on this list? Is there anything else you would have seen at number 1? I was kind of surprised. I figured one of the Florida State victories would be up there, but this South Carolina one just kept popping up. People just kept talking about it online, so I put it as number 1. But now it's your turn. I want to hear what you guys think. Make sure to let me know what you think about this list down below in the comments section. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. You can also click the circle right there in order to subscribe or watch any of the other videos over there to the right that YouTube has suggested for you. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, until next time. To the last 5 decades, starting, of course, with number 10. Forgot to add my little NC State helmet for that first intro. Number 10, 1975, NC State 21, North Carolina 20. A week after playing number 15 Notre Dame, North Carolina went into its annual rivalry game against NC State. Heartbroken in the previous week's loss against the Irish, UNC found itself down 21-14 late with a chance to score. Hey Lifers, Dustin here, and this past season the NC State Wolfpack celebrated 50 years in Carter-Finley Stadium. Now, the stadium was actually opened in 1966, originally as Carter Stadium, with a capacity of 41,000. The hyphenated Finley was added in 1979, and the current capacity is 57,000, making it the 8th largest stadium in the ACC. The Pack have had plenty of huge wins in that stadium over the and tie the game. They actually scored a touchdown, and an extra point would have tied it up and likely tied the game, but head coach Bill Dooley decided to roll the dice and go for 2. He didn't convert. NC State ran the clock out and upset the Tar Heels 21-20. The Tar Heels would finish the season with a final record of 3-7-1, while the Wolfpack would have a pretty successful record considering, going 7-4-1 after a very close loss to Bobby Bowden's West Virginia team in the Peach Bowl. Number 7, 2002, NC State 17, number 14, Florida State 7. When Florida State first joined the ACC in 1992, they absolutely terrified the conference for the first decade. I mean, they were destroying teams. And even though the 2002 squad didn't quite have the cachet and the talent that previous Florida State teams had, their name, Florida State Seminoles, still meant something. And that last 50 years. And I figured today, as we gear up for the 2017 college football season, I would take a look at what I consider to be the top 10 NC State home games of the last 50 years in Carter-Finley Stadium. Now, remember, there are players like Phillip Rivers and Russell Wilson and Mario Williams and coaches like Lou Holtz and Dick Sheridan that have been on the sidelines in this stadium. So come along as we count down the top 10 NC State home games